On a bright morning, Officer Harrison spotted a black woman with a folder downtown. Certain he'd found a new threat, he publicly handcuffed her. Unaware she was a respected FBI agent, this single action would change his life forever. The morning sun filtered through the glass skyscrapers, casting long beams across the busy city streets below. It was a typical weekday rush in the business district. People in sharp suits hurrying with coffee cups and folders, taxis weaving through the traffic, and the faint hum of city life creating a constant backdrop. Officer Harrison, a seasoned cop with a sharp eye for anything that seemed out of place, patrolled the area with an intense focus. His uniform was immaculate, and his walk radiated authority as he scanned his surroundings with practiced vigilance. Harrison had a reputation for his strict approach, always keeping an eye out for anything he considered a disturbance to the city's order. It didn't matter if the disturbance was real or imagined. He was thorough, sometimes to a fault. He prided himself on his dedication, his ability to spot those who didn't seem to fit into the city's pristine image. That morning, his attention was drawn to a black woman standing near the sleek, mirrored facade of a tall office building. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, her hair styled in neat waves, and held a leather folder close to her side. She glanced around occasionally, her face calm and focused, as if waiting for someone. Harrison's gaze lingered. Something about her self-assured presence, her composed stance, felt wrong to him. There was no obvious reason to be suspicious, but he couldn't shake his unease. Recalling his recent departmental briefing on identifying potential threats, he decided to act, reasoning that his instinct was rarely wrong. This woman's poised demeanor struck him as almost defiant, a subtle challenge to his sense of order that he couldn't ignore. Without hesitation, he approached her, his boots clicking against the pavement. As he neared, he demanded sharply, "I'm going to need to see some ID." His tone was rigid, unyielding. He wasn't expecting questions. He rarely had to justify himself. The woman turned to him, meeting his gaze with a look of calm composure that only unsettled him further. This was FBI agent Joyce Williams, and she'd dealt with more than her share of moments like this. Her eyes flashed with irritation, though her voice remained measured as she introduced herself and informed him she was on official business. But Harrison barely listened, cutting her off at every turn, his tone growing sharper. He scrutinized her, as if searching for any sign of threat in her demeanor or expression. Joyce felt the familiar surge of frustration as he dismissed her words, reducing her to a suspicious figure without cause. She'd been in her role long enough to know that escalating the situation wouldn't end well, so she kept her tone calm, even as the weight of his bias bore down on her. But as Harrison raised his voice, drawing the attention of passers-by, Joyce knew this encounter was only beginning, the consequences of which would ripple far beyond this bright morning on the city streets. The vibrant hum of the street faded as Officer Harrison roughly twisted Joyce's arms behind her back, his movements swift and unyielding. He snapped the cold metal cuffs onto her wrists with a force that seemed meant to humiliate rather than restrain. Nearby, pedestrians stopped in their tracks, their expressions a mix of disbelief and discomfort, their eyes flickering between Harrison's unyielding expression and Joyce's composed, dignified stance. To the onlookers, Joyce appeared every bit the professional, a woman in a tailored suit, poised and calm, a stark contrast to the criminal image Harrison seemed determined to paint of her. Joyce's gaze remained steady, her face betraying little emotion, though her eyes held a spark of silent fury. Beneath her calm exterior, anger simmered, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. She knew the truth, knew the power of her own identity and status, and kept her expression steady, even as a wave of humiliation swept over her. She had faced many things in her career, but this moment carried a unique bitterness. Harrison, on the other hand, appeared entirely unfazed by the critical stares around him. He pulled her toward his patrol car, his grip almost punishing. For him, this was simply another threat he believed he had neutralized, a satisfying moment that reaffirmed his authority. His smug expression only deepened as he opened the car door, seating her with a force that made the cuffs bite into her wrists even more. The loud slam of the door echoed down the street, a final mark of his dominance, a sound that seemed to linger as the crowd murmured among themselves. During the ride to the station, Harrison took every chance to look at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze taunting. Each glance was a subtle mockery, his eyes reflecting a twisted satisfaction. Joyce sat upright, meeting his gaze in the mirror with unflinching calm, even as the cuffs dug into her wrists. Her silent resilience only served to irritate him further. She kept her composure, enduring the degrading situation as she mentally prepared herself for the confrontation ahead. Upon arrival at the station, Harrison pulled her out of the car, his grip harsh, guiding her into the building with an air of superiority. Once inside, he made no effort to lower his voice, directing demeaning comments her way with a sneer. His remarks, dripping with disdain, targeted everything from her appearance to his assumptions about her profession. In his mind, she was just another lowly rule-breaker, another face he could disregard. Joyce held her head high, ignoring his words, though each comment fueled a growing fire within her. She knew that the truth of her identity, her rank, her role as an FBI agent, would soon turn his smug confidence to regret. This moment was only the beginning, a spark that would ignite consequences far beyond what Officer Harrison could imagine. Joyce sat quietly in the holding area, her hands still in cuffs, her expression carefully controlled despite the turmoil within. She knew she had to maintain her composure, but a deep sense of indignation simmered beneath her calm exterior. Just then, the door swung open, and Detective Thomas Gray strode in. Gray was a tall, imposing figure, with a serious demeanor and a piercing gaze that commanded respect. He paused when he spotted Joyce, his expression shifting to shock and disbelief as he instantly recognized her. This wasn't just any suspect. This was Joyce Williams, an esteemed FBI agent, a colleague whose skill and professionalism he had long admired. Gray's face hardened with anger as he took in her restrained condition, and his eyes darkened as he turned to face Harrison, the silent rebuke unmistakable. Without a word, he walked over to Joyce, his expression softening as he leaned in to ask, "Joyce, are you okay?" She held his gaze, a flicker of relief crossing her face at his familiar voice, but she only nodded stoically, unwilling to show any hint of vulnerability in front of her captor. Gray's jaw clenched as he turned back to Harrison, his intense glare leaving no doubt of his fury. Moments later, the atmosphere in the room grew even more tense as Captain Martins entered. Martins was known throughout the department for his strict adherence to justice and fairness, a man who demanded professionalism and integrity from every officer. The captain's sharp eyes scanned the room, instantly picking up on the charged atmosphere. His gaze settled on Harrison, his expression growing colder as he sensed the severity of the situation. "Officer Harrison," Martins said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying a distinct edge that sent a shiver down the officer's spine. "Explain yourself. Now." Harrison, who had been standing tall moments before, suddenly looked small and uncertain, his earlier arrogance melting into nervousness. He stammered as he tried to explain, using phrases like suspicious behavior and necessary precautions, but his voice faltered under the captain's unyielding gaze. "Enough," Captain Martins interrupted, his tone harsh. "You acted on assumptions and prejudice, not on evidence. This department has no tolerance for such conduct, especially towards someone of Agent Williams's standing." Harrison's face flushed as the weight of his actions sank in, his mind racing as he realized the potential consequences of his mistake. The smug confidence he had displayed only moments earlier was gone, replaced by visible panic and a growing sense of shame. Finally, Joyce spoke, her voice steady, yet filled with quiet conviction. "My rights were violated today, and such actions warrant a formal inquiry," she stated firmly, her gaze unwavering. Though her tone was calm, her words held the unmistakable strength of someone who would not back down. Her eyes flashed with determination, a clear message that she intended to see justice served. Harrison felt a cold sweat break out as he stood there, caught between his captain's fury and Joyce's resolute gaze. He realized, with a sinking heart, that his career was now on the line, the consequences of his rash actions closing in on him with undeniable force. By the end of the day, word of the incident spread throughout the precinct. Leadership made a swift decision. Harrison was to be temporarily suspended. As he gathered his belongings, his colleagues averted their eyes, watching quietly as he packed his things. In his eyes was a mix of rage and humiliation, but he kept silent, fully aware that his own actions had led to this outcome. Gathering his badge and personal items, he exited, the silence in the precinct almost tangible. Joyce stood at a distance, watching him leave. Her expression held no malice or satisfaction, only a calm, mature assurance that justice had been served. She knew that her patience and professionalism in the face of prejudice had helped bring about this outcome. Her presence and her resilience had compelled the precinct to confront an issue it might otherwise ignore. As Harrison passed by, their eyes met for a brief moment. In his was raw bitterness. In hers, a restrained hint of triumph, but mostly a quiet resolve. He understood that her persistence had led to his suspension, and he realized his career might now be in jeopardy. The precinct announced a full internal investigation, committed to identifying any instances of racial bias against black citizens and preventing similar incidents in the future. Harrison's story and his discriminatory behavior became a case study for the department, sparking discussions on reshaping interactions with the public. Joyce left the station with a sense of closure, recognizing this day as a small but significant victory for those who face bias and injustice daily. For her, it wasn't just a personal triumph, but a small step forward for everyone deserving of equality and respect.